Have you ever stumbled into a moment you were never meant to witness? A moment so strange, so out of place, that your brain tries to explain it before your heart even knows how to react. That's exactly what happened to me the day I passed by my daughter Emily's house and saw my wife's car parked at the gate, when she was supposed to be miles away at work. At first, it felt like one of those harmless coincidences. You know, the kind, something you shrug off and forget about 10 minutes later. But then I noticed the windows were slightly cracked. The engine was off. And there was this stillness about the car that didn't match the reason she'd given me earlier that morning. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Soft, tense, and absolutely not hers. Right then, a thought hit me. One I didn't want to have. Why was my wife sitting silently in her car with someone else? And what could they possibly be talking about so quietly? I should have walked away. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I stepped closer anyway. And that choice exposed a truth no one prepared me for. You ever have one of those moments where a tiny mistake leads you straight into something you were never meant to see? That's what this was for me. One wrong turn. One missed exit. And suddenly, I'm driving down the street that leads right past my daughter Emily's house. I wasn't planning to stop. I wasn't even supposed to be in that neighborhood. But then I saw it. My wife Laura's car, parked right at the gate like it had been sitting there for a while. And instantly, something in my stomach tightened. You ever feel that? That quiet alarm your brain tries to ignore? At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she dropped something off. Maybe she was running an errand and forgot to mention it. People do that, right? But the longer I looked, the stranger it felt. The windows were cracked just enough to let air through. The engine was off. The interior looked still. Too still. And then her phone went straight to voicemail when I called. That's when my heartbeat picked up, and not because I expected anything dramatic, but because silence, total, deliberate silence, can be louder than noise. I stepped a little closer, just enough to hear something faint. A murmur. A voice. Not hers. Right there, I felt my whole body go cold. Who was in that car with her? And why didn't she want me to know? Because what I heard next was the last thing I expected. Have you ever recognized a voice so instantly that it stops you in your tracks? That's exactly what happened to me. Because the moment I leaned in just enough to catch the next sentence, I froze. I knew that voice. And not in a vague, oh that sounds familiar kind of way. No, this was unmistakable. It was Mark, my son-in-law, Emily's husband. The man who should have been at work across town, not whispering inside my wife's car like they were discussing a classified mission. And instantly, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were planning a surprise for Emily? Maybe something happened at the house? Maybe they needed privacy? But if that were true, why the tension? Why the low voices? Why the secrecy? I leaned a little closer, holding my breath, hoping to catch even a few words. And then I heard my wife's voice. Soft, shaky, nothing like how she normally speaks. We can't keep this from him forever, she said. From him, not her, not them, him, me. Right there, my heart dropped into my stomach. Because whatever they were hiding, it wasn't small. You don't use that tone for something harmless. Then Mark responded, sounding frustrated. Not until we're sure. If we tell him now, it could blow everything up. Everything? What everything? That's when Laura said something else. Something that sliced right through the confusion and hit me like a punch. She said a name I hadn't heard in years. And hearing it inside that car window changed everything. You ever hear a name you thought you'd buried years ago? A name that yanks you straight back into memories you'd spent half your life trying to outrun? That's what hit me when Laura whispered it. Thomas, my brother, person I hadn't spoken to in years. Not because he moved away, not because life got busy, but because the last time we talked, we said things you can't take back. Words that build walls instead of bridges. Words that make silence feel safer than conversation. So why on earth was his name being spoken inside my wife's car? And why in that tone? Like he was the center of some secret nobody planned to tell me. My mind started racing, fast, because hearing his name wasn't just unexpected. It was unsettling. Thomas didn't show up in people's lives casually. Not after what happened between us. Then I heard Laura again, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached out to me months ago. Months? I felt a sting I didn't want to admit. You ever realize you're the last one in the room to know something important? That's exactly how it felt. Mark added, we just needed to be sure he wasn't exaggerating. Exaggerating what? What could Thomas possibly say that would make my wife and my son-in-law meet behind closed doors? Literally. My chest tightened as I leaned even closer, desperate for anything that made sense. Then Laura said it. If Daniel finds out the truth the wrong way, it could destroy him. And right then, I realized this wasn't just about a secret. It was a warning. Have you ever reached a point where staying silent feels worse than speaking up? That's exactly where I was standing. Right beside that car, heart pounding, mind spinning, and no more room left for guessing. So I did the one thing I hadn't planned on. I knocked. Just one tap on the window. Soft, but sharp enough to slice straight through their conversation. And the reaction, wow. You should have seen their faces. Laura's head snapped up like she'd been caught doing something impossible. Mark looked like he'd just swallowed every word he'd said in the last 10 minutes. You ever walk into a room and everyone goes quiet in a way that tells you everything? That was the energy. Laura rolled the window down slowly, like she was hoping I'd disappear before it reached the bottom. Daniel, what are you doing here? She asked. I could have asked her the same thing. In fact, I almost did. But instead, something else came out. What did Thomas tell you? The question hung there, heavy, undeniable. Laura looked at Mark. Mark looked at the dashboard. Nobody looked at me. Finally, Mark exhaled. He said someone from your past is looking for you. My stomach twisted. Someone from my past? Who? And why now? Laura leaned forward, her voice unsteady. We wanted to tell you once we understood everything. We didn't want to panic you. Panic me? Over what? Then Mark said something that made the air feel colder. This isn't just a message, Daniel. It's a warning. But the real shock, the part that hit harder than anything else, that came next. You ever brace yourself for bad news, but the reality still hits harder than anything you imagined? That's what happened next. Because when Laura finally opened her mouth to explain, it wasn't anger I felt. It was something colder, something heavier. She said Thomas didn't just reach out randomly. He contacted her because he'd heard from someone I used to work with years ago. A man named Victor. A man who blamed me for the collapse of a business deal that went wrong, spectacularly wrong. The kind of wrong that follows people for years. But here's the part that really shook me. Thomas told Laura that Victor hadn't let it go. Not even after all this time. He'd resurfaced, reached out, asked questions. Too many questions. Laura continued, her voice shaking. Thomas said he sounded fixated, Daniel. Like he was trying to track you down. Track me down? For what? Closure? Revenge? Answers? I didn't know, and neither did they. But they thought telling me before confirming anything might make things spiral. And that's when it clicked. If I hadn't driven by that day, if I hadn't stopped, if I hadn't heard those whispers, I would have been walking blind into something I didn't even know existed. Sometimes the truth doesn't show up gently. Sometimes it hits you sideways on a day you weren't supposed to be there, in a place you never planned to be. And now I'm left wondering, what would you have done? Should they have told me sooner? Because one thing's for sure, that accidental detour may have just saved me from something I'm only beginning to understand.